A wise person would look at the time code and ask themselves, is this a good use of my time? Well, I think it is, since it might change the way we view interactions of vegans with the rest of the population. And if you are part of the rest of the population, please consider giving me your trust for the duration of the video. I'm not here to shame you or educate you on veganism. I'm here to deliver good news at the end, so stick around if you can. I first thought of this concept when I witnessed an interaction between 5 people. The vegan in the group was showing images on his phone of calves from a dairy farm he visited, and the rest were openly mocking him, laughing at him, calling him a liar, and trying to get him arrested. The vegan was a nice guy who very gracefully accepted their mockery, but why did everybody seem to dislike him so much? For some reason, this reminded me of a story I read when I was a child. I don't remember all the details, but it was about an emperor executing a messenger that brought them bad news from the front line, thus making other messengers refuse delivering news to them. An effective way to not get bad news, but I think this describes the first ever bubble. So the bearer of bad news was somehow held responsible for the news they bear, despite being clearly an innocent party in the matter. And child me definitely felt this was unfair. Grown-up me thought, what if it's not just a thing of the past that kings and emperors used to do, but an actual psychological phenomena that still happens today and maybe there is research on it? There is, lots. And I found a paper that not only has an extensive literature summary that they based their hypothesis on, but also a chain of 11 studies they conducted, each time isolating another aspect that might coexist and interact with their hypothesis, making it more and more specific, isolated, and blatantly clear. Shooting the messenger is a real group of reactions that happens whenever people receive bad news. Here's how they hypothesize that it works. Hearing bad news counters the person's commonly held beliefs that the world is just, benevolent, predictable, coherent, and controllable. This triggers the desire to make things make sense again, and they fulfill this desire by assigning motives to the bearers of bad news, which leads to reduction in likability. Specifically, there is a distinction between the news-generating bearer who had something or everything to do with the bad news and the clearly innocent messenger. Here's a breakdown of the 11 studies they conducted to prove their hypothesis. First, they measured the basic effect of an innocent messenger delivering bad news, resulting in significant reduction in likability. Then they isolated the messenger from the bystander, thus isolating the impact of receiving bad news from actually disliking the messenger for delivering the bad news. Then they made the distinction between receiving news inconsistent with one's beliefs and receiving bad news, showing that disliking the messenger is an additional effect from disliking someone that we disagree with. Then they specified the desire to sense-make as part of the effect chain by isolating reasonable bad news from anti-reasonable ones. The next part ties the desire to sense-make to the dislike of the messenger specifically. Then the researchers isolated this effect from the effect of receiving unexpected bad news. Then measured the ascription of malicious motivations to the obviously innocent messenger, and whether the dislike holds when the emotional processes are controlled for. Then the messenger was made to act empathically to measure if that changes the outcome. It didn't, the messenger was still disliked more. Then they measured the difference between good faith messengers and bad faith messengers to show that good faith bearers of bad news are still disliked. And finally, they showed that bad faith messengers are not judged harshly if they deliver good news. In every step, the outcome was that the messenger delivering bad news was measured as less likable, regardless of or separate from confounding processes. Wow, this was a lot. Are you still here? Good, because now that we have gone through the research, let's specify if it's what's happening when vegans interact with non-vegans. I sent the paper to a psychology enthusiast, Zack Elwood, and then we had a talk about it.
I'm Zack Elwood, and I am lately interested in depolarization. So I've been doing my psychology podcast, People Who Read People, which is focused on reading behavior, reading psychology for a few years. And along the way, I became interested in depolarization, reducing us versus them, political animosity in America, or just generally. So I'm interested in these, ways to make persuasive arguments, ways to reduce unreasonable aspects of political anger or anger in general. And I'm most well known for my Poker Tells work, which was uh, behavior in poker. And I used to be a professional poker player, so that led to me writing some pretty well known books about Poker Tells, aka poker behavior.
The basic premise is that shooting the messenger is one of the things that is happening when a vegan interacts with non-vegan on the subject of veganism.
I think it is my amateur perspective. It is a factor. I think there's other factors involved. It's kind of like a lot of things that get people angry. It's like there's multiple things going on, but I do agree. Yeah, that could be is often a factor. Yeah.
What do you think are the other factors that are interacting with this?
I would say my rough sense of it is that a big part of the anger and the pushback to animal rights and vegan messages, kind of a laziness inertia thing where, recognizing this as a problem would require so much change and people don't like to change. And so we look for various ways to justify the ways we live our lives in the same way. For example, somebody could judge me for my plastic use or my travel, and say like, these are irresponsible things you're doing that hurt environment or hurt other things. We all have these ways we justify the things we do because we're like, that would be a huge imposition for me to have to think about these things. So we look for ways to say, oh, well, it's normal. Everyone's doing it. We've done it before. We basically use our inertia. That comes first, and then we look for ways to justify it. So I think that's one factor. I also think there's others like a general pushback to like people judging us. We feel angry that people think they're better than us, and then there's the just world belief, which is the belief that motivates a lot of people's unwillingness to deal with horrible things happening. If you actually believe that there's suffering all around us, then it's just be too depressing. So we look for ways to say, to kind of support that idea and say, oh, everything must be okay. It can't be that bad because we don't want to live in a depressing world. And you can see that in kind of beliefs of like, denying that the world's unfair or that people are suffering in various ways. It can be even a thing of behind conspiracy theories because people would rather believe in some elaborate conspiracy theory than believe that the world's kind of fucked up and scary place, basically. So I think there's a range of things, and it might be different things for different people because there can be intellectual beliefs too. People can genuinely believe I need meat to be healthy and such, and they can have rational reasons for that, even if we disagree. So I think it's like a whole bunch of mix, but I do think the bad news messenger thing can be for the people that really do see that animals are being abused and suffering. Like that creates cognitive dissonance, and they don't like to be told that. Result of them getting angry at people, bringing it to their attention, right? So I think I think it's a big point there. Yeah,
One of the things is actually that you mentioned is they
just
actually
world. Yeah.
just world, yeah. They actually put it in this study that I found about shooting the
Mm-hmm.
messenger, and they said that it's part of their proposed process. They're
Mm-hmm.
proposing a process of sense making when receiving bad news. And one of those processes is actually confronting something that contradicts this world view that the world is just, benevolent, predictable, coherent, and controllable. Maybe the fact that vegan message also contradicts benevolence is part of the thing.
Well, I think all these things are tied in. If we really agreed and recognize that the animals that we know that they can suffer because we have dogs and cats as pets and such. Everybody knows that animals can suffer. We know we have empathy for them, and if we really recognized the extent of the suffering and what was going on and is a disruptive thing, right? It's like we have to think about
Mm.
it, and that's can be upsetting to us either from the just world perspective or just from the fact that we have to change our lives, right? It's like we would have to think about it more. We would have to change our patterns. For people that are on the conservative political spectrum, that's also a trait associated with liberals or whatever. So they would have to completely overhaul their whole worldview, right? And like recognize that maybe some of the things they judge liberals for make some sense or something. It's like there's all these various obstacles, whether it's having to change your entire worldview and perspective and way of life, or having to think about things more, right? Which is the shoot the messenger thing too. It's like all of these things are lined up, I feel like, as various obstacles, like any entrenched belief that has these various obstacles and feedback mechanisms, I think, because it's like, yeah, you don't want to change, you don't want to think about it, so you get angry at the people, and then you filter their message even more through like an angry filter. Yeah, I think it's all related. Yeah.
So, what do you think is the bad news that the vegan messenger conveys? Because it seems to me it's one of two things, but maybe there are more. It's either the animal abuse or the fact that we need to change to mitigate this animal abuse.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that does boil it down. It's recognizing the suffering, and then it's also what do you have to do about that, which is like very much even apart from the suffering. How will this change my life? How will this change what I have to do? And also, how will it change how people perceive me, right?
Mhm.
If they change, then their friends and family will also judge them, and that's another obstacle. So yeah, I think it's those two things. It's the bad news of the suffering and of the problem, and it's what does this mean for me in my life?
So, what you're saying, and what actually the study is implying as well, is that there is kind of a like a stack effect of several processes that are happening together. And actually, since there are two bad news at the same time, you can also stack on top of that. The study suggests that if the messenger chooses to convey the message over being ascribed to.
I do see, yeah, multiple levels to this. Although sometimes I think the blaming the specific vegans for the way they communicate is often just an excuse. We don't want to think about something, so we'll say like, I'm not going to think about it because of the way they told me about it. Whereas like that's often just an excuse, because there's plenty of people saying the same thing in a more polite or persuasive way too. But people use the most aggressive people as an excuse to, like they're mean, so I'm not going to. It's kind of like in politics too. Like I've heard people say straight up, like liberals were mean to me, so I'm voting for Trump. Like that doesn't make sense, but our emotions play a big role, and we can justify things because of the way people treat us. That can be a kind of either an excuse or a genuine like emotional reaction, because emotions do play a big role. Yeah.
People don't actually agree usually, sometimes instinctively, with the vegan message for whatever reason. So that's another stack to not like the messenger, right?
Yeah, I mean, I do think we should also acknowledge that people can have rational reasons as they see
Yeah.
them for disbelieving the vegan message. And I wrote about this in probably one of the more popular things I wrote was this examination of the better arguments against veganism, basically
Mm.
acknowledging like there can be reasons for people believing that we need to eat meat because, for example, needing B12 and such, and on these other kind of ideas. And I think it helps to acknowledge and address those kinds of beliefs people have, because they can be very rationally held, and ignoring those beliefs just allows those people to be like, well, the vegans are ignoring this argument I have. So that is something you also have to confront, because pretending that those don't exist is people will just think you're ignoring their real reasons. But then you can always say like, well, if you believe we need to eat animals, there's no reason you couldn't eat like the least sentient animals, like oysters. But most people are using these arguments to justify eating,
Yeah.
dog or not dogs, pigs and cows and such. So they're kind of using it as an excuse, because if they believe the other arguments about like reducing suffering of sentient animals, they would still try to eat like the least sentient animals. So often it's just an excuse to keep doing what we're
Yeah,
doing.
absolutely. In fact, the study actually talks about their sense-making process. It is in the sphere of associative versus propositional, and they are claiming that it's actually propositional. It comes from a syllogistic inference.
The perspective that a lot of meat eaters would have, or most people in general in society have, is we've done this for a while. The fact that it is a tradition, and the fact that morals are kind of relative, means that it is
Mm.
okay. Most people don't think it's bad, so therefore it is not bad, and they would even adjust their perspective, they might say, well, if most of society gets to the point where most of us say it's bad, then it is bad. And you can argue with that and disbelieve it, but we can acknowledge that they do have rational beliefs for that, even if you might also filter it through the lens of like, well, they just want their lives to be easier, right? Like they might be arguing from a motivated reasoning perspective. They can create rational arguments in the context of that, or we can acknowledge they can genuinely believe those things, even if we strongly disagree
Yeah,
with them.
absolutely. One more thing the study states is that after the sense making was triggered, what happens is that the receiver of the bad news ascribes to the messenger motivations, even if it's very clear that the messenger is not part of the problem, did not create the subject of bad news.
Right. Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I think it gets down to these our emotional reactions in general, because it's something I talk about with the depolarization work I do. It's like when someone tells us something that is upsetting to us for, or whatever it is, we have these tendencies to be like, why did they tell me that? There must be this underlying motive. And with the political polarization in the US, you see this a lot on the left and the right, where people will hear something that's like a completely rational point, like you can't argue with it, and it's a pretty good point, but they will filter it through the lens of like, well, why did you tell me that? You must believe all
Yeah.
these other things, that tell us like what your true motivations are, or else you wouldn't be focusing on that point. We tend to filter these things through the lens of like our our pessimistic us versus them framing of whatever it is. There's also the stance of like believing that the people who tell you things that upset you are not being genuine, they're being deceptive in their beliefs. So you see this a lot in the political polarization, also in the veganism, where they're like, oh, they're just doing this for attention, or they just do it because they like feeling superior, or they're just doing it because they're trying to achieve XYZ, as opposed to just saying like, okay, well, that's a valid point. You're making a valid point, and our emotions get involved, and when then we filter things.
Do you think that the vegan messengers, i.e., activists, can do something to mitigate this sense making mechanism and this shooting the messenger process?
I do, yeah. That's one of the reasons I wrote that piece I mentioned about the best anti-vegan arguments with a lot of things. I mean, people are passionate about things, they're angry about things, they speak in ways that are not persuasive. Because if you look into the science about making persuasive arguments at all, you'll see that the best way to do it is to treat people with respect and remember that you were not always a vegan. People you're trying to persuade of whatever have understandable reasons, factors for what they believe, and they can be prone to getting emotional just as you can. And for people that are really interested in making the most persuasive arguments, I think it pays to look into the research on what makes persuasive arguments, and it means trying to remain, trying to see their perspective as much as you can, and treat the things they say as real things to grapple with, like real arguments to make, and not assign them the worst, the most pessimistic qualities, and to also try to not get angry and try to take a more objective, like removed approach, because the research shows that when you try to shame people or insult them, they're just not going to be receptive. I think one of the key things is being tough on ideas and being soft on people. We can judge ideas and criticize ideas while acknowledging that good and rational people can have various stances on things, and that's a more persuasive and less insulting way to make the arguments, and makes people more likely to be like, hey, you're right, maybe that is a
Hmm.
bad idea. It's not that I'm bad, it's
Yeah.
that the idea and the logic behind it is bad. Yeah, reducing the chances that all of these different objections and pushback mechanisms would come into play as much as you can. So being aware of the reactions people can have is a big part of like trying to avoid the reactions.
How about like directly addressing the shooting the messenger and saying, yeah, I'm just a messenger, don't shoot me?
Yeah, I think however much you can remove those psychological triggers, and that's one of the things you can do.
So, vegan activists are bearers of bad news while having an opinion inconsistent with most of the population's worldview, while choosing to speak up and not being assigned the task, while maybe not being empathic or nice enough, while actually delivering two types of bad news. One that is inconsistent with one's worldview and triggers sense making, and the other asking people to change. That's a huge stack of processes, and all of them separately result in reduction in likability. So maybe this stack and many other things that we haven't thought about yet is responsible for the visceral reactions vegans get. If you are vegan and familiar with vegan culture, the part about just worldview might sound a bit familiar. This kind of sounds like Melanie Joy's research on Carnism, right? Dr. Joy proposes that meat eaters have a worldview that eating meat is normal, necessary, and nice, and the vegan message undermines this belief. The process of shooting the messenger is less specific to the topic of eating animals, but if it is what's actually going on, the lack of specificity makes it more relatable and easier to wrap our heads around. Who among you hasn't got mad at a bureaucrat in their lives shall cast the first stone? Put yourself back into the shoes of both sides of that interaction. Look, I don't know if this kind of analysis can help vegan activists to have more productive conversations. At the least, giving this process a name can make us all relate to one another. I know in this video we concentrated on what's happening to the receiver of bad news, but it sucks to be on either side of it. And that is the actual good news. We are in this conversation together. We are experiencing two sides of a situation that might make us dislike each other. But now that we know why, maybe we can go through the process quicker or eliminate it altogether. Because wouldn't it be less problematic to measure how much we like somebody based on who they are rather than what news they deliver to us? That might be possible to achieve, and being aware of the problem is the second stage in the psychological process of change. But that's for another video. Thank you for sticking around. A huge thanks to Zack Elwood for coming on to talk about this. If you found value in this video, do me a favor. Grab the link and paste it wherever you hang out online to share the value with others. Yeah, this was a long one. There should be some kind of reward system for watching to the very end. If you have ideas, put them in the comments.